tomorrow,
Yes.
there is a show scheduled to go live. So we'll have another episode going live, and I'll have these scheduled. I want to try and work on it and have several of them scheduled ahead of time so they'll go automatically. And I'm going to send out a newsletter. So if anybody wants to still sign up for the newsletter or pass it along to anyone to sign up, that way we have announcements. Hey, this is going out and all that. And then for tonight, we were going to revisit experiences, paranormal, ghostly experiences. And I know we talked a bit with Gina last time about that. And I think the rest of us have had a little bit, but I thought maybe we could start with her, a couple more of her experiences we could discuss. And then there's actually something her and I were discussing with that the other night that would probably be a good topic to get some opinions on. So what do you got, sweetie? Hit us with something.
So this is one story in particular, and I don't think I talked about this one yet. I lived in Alabama during this time, and my ex was involved he was an electrician, so he worked on a lot of construction sites. And they were digging up a site somewhere in Alabama, and he brought home a small, like, wooden box. When I initially looked at the wooden box, I wouldn't have thought it was anything older or had been around for a while, but he had dug it up on a construction site and brought it home and gave it to the youngest, which is Jason, my 13-year-old. And we opened the box, and inside of it was like action figures, but it wasn't anything modern. It looked, you could tell they were like soldier looking, but not like little green army men, but they were soldier looking. And he played with them for a couple of days and just put them up. They were wooden.
G.I. Joes?
You could tell that they were not G.I. Joes. They weren't like anything like that. They were older looking than that. I'll have to look through like old toys and that. So in other words, my opinion is in the end that these toys were made somewhere in the 1900s or something is what I think. But anyway, when the box itself and the couple of toys Jason played with, just put it up on the shelf, and I didn't think nothing about it. So I was used to like odd things happening, and this is something that we could get Frankie to come in and talk about one day with us, because most of the kids were outside playing. Frankie and I were in the house enjoying the air conditioning unit while the rest of the children played. And we were sitting in a living room, and then my bedroom was to the right of where we were sitting, and we started to hear what sounded like drums. Not an entire band, not a bunch of music or something that might have been playing from the TV. It sounded like, yeah, brrr, tsh, brrr, tsh. I was like, well, that's weird. And then I knew my TV was on in my bedroom, so I thought that must be something that's going on in my TV. But I had remembered that SpongeBob was on in there because that's what Jason liked when he was little. And even there was a SpongeBob episode where there was a lot of like rock and roll played. So I thought, I just assumed that was the episode that was on TV, but I kept hearing it. And I think the thing that stuck out the biggest in my mind was Frankie sitting next to me and watching his like face come around, and like him looking at me, and his eyes were huge. And he was looking at me and looking towards the bedroom, looking at me, and his mom, do you hear that? And I said, I do, Frankie. Do you hear that? And he's like, it sounds like there's a bunch of drummers in the bedroom. And to us, I went and I looked it up after a time when that was all said and done. And it sounded like it would be the march of like soldiers going into a battle, not a like death march or anything like that, but like old timey drum playing. And it went on in my bedroom for probably a solid 5 or 6 minutes before it actually finally stopped. Frankie and I were the only two that heard it. I did some investigating. On my own, nobody else helped me out. And basically what I came up with was that the possibility that this was a time capsule from maybe a child back in the day. I don't know, but all I knew was that I needed to put it back in the box, seal it back up. And I should have taken it back to the site where it was originally dug up at, but I didn't do that. I had wound up taking it into the wood line where we lived and burying it back in the ground. I didn't have what's the words I'm looking for? There was no direction. I just basically did what I felt was right by burying the box back in the ground, saying some I'm sorry, whoever we disturbed, whatever we disturbed, I need you to go back to where you came from, because I didn't want any bad, evil juju spirits or whatever. I didn't want to, bring anything into the house that was going to hurt anybody. So that was probably one of the biggest experiences that made me feel validated because somebody else was there with me and heard what I heard. And that was, how old is Jason? 13. So it's probably about 10 years ago that happened.
So I find that the couple things I find interesting about that is, number one, 2 people heard that. And number 2, if it was a SpongeBob cartoon, there's no way it would go on for 5 minutes. And even if it was like the radio, you would have heard music, other music, not just the drums.
Well, and Frankie, sorry to interrupt, Frankie, we both actually walked towards the kitchen, and then we both did that like scary Scooby-Doo look around the corner in the bedroom, and nothing was there. And then we looked at the TV. It wasn't the episode where there was a lot of music and rock gods. It was one of the ones where, anyway, it wasn't a musical one. It was one of the ones where SpongeBob was, I'm ready, or whatever. So we knew it wasn't SpongeBob, is what I'm saying.
Right. The cool thing about this, though, too, and like Steven said, one of the reasons why I think experiencers don't share their stories is because it is so personal. But whenever you have somebody to be there to quantify it and to qualify it, that makes a difference. And I think that is one of the reasons why people are apprehensive about coming forward, is because they just don't feel that anybody's going to believe them. But at least in this case, you had somebody there to verify that you were actually hearing something.
Yeah, it was pretty intense. And it was the way that I felt like at any moment we were going to see a procession come out of my bedroom, because it felt like it was getting closer and that there was more than one person drumming. It obviously, again, we never seen anybody, and I just don't know. If I ever get a chance to look up or show you what they look like or draw pictures of it, I will do that. But
maybe we could do that for when the episode goes live.
Yeah, that'd be great. Did you feel fear? Did you and your son feel fear, or was it not that kind of emotion? Was it something different?
No, neither of us felt fear. I feel like with any person who's experienced anything, it's always gonna make me jumpy. As many times as anything's ever happened to me, I've still been like, it surprises you. You don't expect it, and then it happens. But there was no feeling of like maliciousness or fear.
Right.
It felt like there was something in our house letting us know that it was there.
Yes. And whenever you put the object back, you had no other kind of residual things happen to you?
So it was a couple of days before I put the little like toy soldiers or whatever back in the box, because 2 days after the drumming, I heard rustling in the kitchen. And when I came into the kitchen expecting to hear one of the rampaging through the refrigerator or cupboard, I walked into the refrigerator door being open, and several, like there was a jar of ketchup on the ground, or the bottle of ketchup, and then there was like a jar of mayonnaise. So I chalked it up to, okay, my ex had maybe dug up something and brought, and people who were at rest were no longer at rest. And I don't know, maybe whoever we brought into the house, they were hungry. They didn't know where they were at anymore. Maybe they felt like they woke up from a long nap or something, I don't know. And they were in the kitchen looking for food. I went around the house and I looked to make sure everybody was in bed. Nobody was awake, which it seemed that way. Obviously, a kid could have gotten up and gotten something out of the refrigerator and not shut it properly. But it was the noise I heard that somebody was rustling around in there. And I just thought to myself, I said, okay, put the things back in the refrigerator. I'm like, you're probably hungry, but you're really not going to be able to eat. So just stay out of the refrigerator. We don't want to waste electricity. And I put everything away and shut it. And then a couple of days after that was when I had decided to put the like little toys back in the box. And I did. I took it into the woods, and Frankie didn't come with me, but basically just buried in the ground, told, I don't know who you are. I don't know if this was a little boy or a little girl's box of toys, if this was something that maybe somebody went off to war and this was his toys before he had to go off to war. I didn't know who it was. I just tried to cover the basis and say, everything's okay. Go back to rest. Go back to where you came from. You don't need to be here. And it stopped after that. So,
Colin, do you have or know of any other stories of similar reports?
Yeah, spirits being tied to objects is like a common trope in ghost stories of every culture I'm familiar with. At least that has ghost stories. So yes, I think there is something to be said about the value that individuals put on their stuff, and then the value that other individuals later put on old stuff that they find. And there's a lot of power culturally with old things, especially old things that clearly were precious to someone at some time. I feel like that's worth bringing up at
Yeah.
least.
So what you're saying is my father is going to haunt the oil cans or something.
No, probably all the wire that he's.
Oh my God, the wood products. We're just going to give them all away. So I got a thought, and this isn't even a complete thought or even a theory, and it's not explaining it. It's just something to ponder. In our, and I bring this up at times, our physics world, especially modern physics, they're discovering more and more how time factors into some of this. So I wonder if the noise, the sound was actually playing at the right time for the people that were experiencing it, meaning the soldiers, what we would think of 100, 200 years ago. But for them, at that same location, at that time, it was happening right then. And I wonder if there was some loop or connection between the times, and it's something we don't understand yet about how time operates.
Yeah, I like the idea that you said. Now, because this was in a box and it seems as if these toys, and sometimes whenever you deal with toys, you can have intentions attached to them or animating them in a way. Now, I've investigated some areas around my area where there was a lot of activity in the French and Indian War. And there have been EVPs that come up with people whistling Yankee Doodle Dandy, the sounds of horses neighing, the sounds of gunshots and things. So those are different. I think when we deal with a toy, we're dealing with something a little bit separate than what's going on. Now, of course, a child may have them and they're playing with them with intentions that they're giving, like you said. There's intentions of battle. There's the sounds of war that goes on with the playing of them and everything. But I think that this case that Gina has brought up is slightly more interesting because it seems as if there's something being played out through those toys, and they are just not merely playthings. And as Colin said, there are a lot of instances in the case where people have objects and there's an attachment to them of some for some reason. But yeah, whenever we're dealing with something with a child, something that was obviously loved and cared for and played, it seems as if they sometimes can take on a life of their own.
This definitely is probably the writer in me coming out, but what if it's some like Civil War, Revolutionary War spirit that didn't cross over and latched onto the figures because maybe from their perspective, they couldn't tell the difference between a lead toy figure and a real body, and they were confused or something.
Or just imagine people talk about dolls all the time, that you have this disembodied spirit roaming out there and you would naturally want to try to find some sort of vessel for it. And that's like Colin said, these are common tropes, but because they're common, it's because there is this cultural acceptance that these kind of things can happen.
Man, sweetie, you need to call your brother and warn him that Lee Majors might possess his Steve Austin doll.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That was the holy grail of action figures whenever I was a kid. They were a little bit too expensive just for the common person to have. So I think that I think I must have been in about fourth grade whenever it came out. And that was what everybody wanted. And I don't think there was anybody in my class that had one. I don't think there was anybody that had one. So
yeah, those were cool.
They were. But look at it this way too. Like these common things. This might have been somebody's pride and joy. This might have been something that a kid had wanted for a while, and maybe you got it for Christmas or whatever. And there is a lot of emotions that are tied up in that kind of stuff.
Especially with kids.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or especially with kids or, again, real soldiers that were in battle.
And so what toys represent are that innocence that's not been lost in any way. And what war represents in a lot of cases is that childhood innocence being stripped away very quickly. So there's a dichotomy going on here. This could have been somebody's toy. He wanted to be a soldier, and then he goes off to whatever, Vietnam or whatever, and he experiences that kind of world in real life. And that leaves you with this kind of fissure in your being, or you had dreamt about this kind of stuff your entire life, and then you meet with it face to face, and it's not quite as glorious as you imagined. That might have been what had happened in this case.
All right. So what else do you have, Gina? You had something else you were going to say? Talk about?
I can tell. I got another one. This one was it makes me smile, but it was when I first started working over at the hospital in Geneva, I was told I was working like 6 o'clock in the morning until 2:30 in the afternoon. So when you got there at 5:30, 5:45 to clock in, it was a pretty skeleton crew, if you will. And my supervisor at the time had told me to go down to where the kitchen was to get a few supplies to bring back up to the hospital floor to med surge. When I took the elevator downstairs, I went down there and I could very clearly hear somebody humming, rustling around in the kitchen. And I had said out loud, "Excuse me, I'm from med surge. I'm fairly new. I came down here to get," and I don't remember XYZ. It was like basically some stuff for a few of the patients that we had on the floor, like some juices, Jello, things like that. And the woman said, "Oh, they're over there." She spun around. In my mind, when she turned, she was wearing what I would describe as an older nurse's, like the kind of, I don't know, it was a nurse's uniform, but it was a dress and it was white. And I thought, that's interesting. We must have a couple older nurses that still work here that wear the more traditional looking uniforms. And I had told her, "Thank you very much." I found what I needed in the refrigerator, a couple of things that were stacked up in containers. And she said, "Oh, no problem. Anytime, sweetheart." I never seen her face. I never, all I knew is that she was just moving and bustling around very quickly in the kitchen area. And I got my stuff, went back up to the floor, and I had mentioned that there was a nurse working down in the cafeteria, not the cafeteria, in the kitchen behind the cafeteria. And they were like, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "The nurse." They were like, "We don't have any nurse that's working downstairs in the kitchen. It's usually just the kitchen staff." I was like, No, the nurse that's wearing the more like traditional older nurse's uniform." And they were like, "Oh, we know who you're talking about." And I'm like, "Oh, who? What's her name?" They were like, "That's the nurse that's been here for 150 years. And I'm like, "I'm sorry, it's who?" And they said, one of the original nurses that was with the hospital before it was built to what it is now, in the original state that it was in, she's still here. She's still working. Again, it took me a couple beats to, "What do you mean she's still working here?" And I was like, "Oh, you mean the nurse?" And they were like, "Yes, she has never left." And I just remember that whole feeling. And it's not, I don't know, goosebumps everywhere. Hair stood up on the back of my neck, because I realized I encountered somebody who was no longer living in this plane of existence, in this dimension, but was still very, very clearly doing her job and very happy about it. Humming, just bustling, doing whatever she needed to do. And it was one of the best experiences that I ever had in that. And it still gets me like going and choked up, because she was I got nothing but good feelings and vibes that this person was still there after all this time, making sure things were going along like they were supposed to be going. And numerous people had reported her at the hospital. So it was pretty cool experience. Now, if I can go back and talk to a few people, I probably could get some records. I probably could get her name. I don't know it anymore off the top of my head, but I did at one point in time. They just called her not the lady in white, the nurse in white, basically, is what she was called at the hospital.
And again, for this one, the things that I find intriguing are she knew nothing about this and just thought it was a normal person, but other people knew about it. Other people have seen it also. So yeah, you could argue that maybe Gina had heard about it, so it influenced her. She saw it. She was tired. It was early. I'm sure there are people that would argue that. To me, again, and I've said this before, you have to trust the person and know the person, which is why a lot of the videos online are hard to believe, because we don't know them, we don't trust them. But if my wife said, hey, this is what I saw, I put a lot more validity into that and trusting
Sure.
of it.
Yeah. And in my research and in my firsthand experiences, I've talked with a lot of people that have dealt with the medical field. And it seems as if that type of person that's drawn to that particular kind of vocation want to make sure that what is going on there in the relations with patients continues well after they've, shuffled off their mortal coil, if you will. They're still doing it. I've had these experiences not only in hospital settings, but also in mental health settings as well, too. The other places where you find this kind of stuff continuing after death is in monasteries or a lot of convents as well, too. The ghost monk or the ghostly nun. But yeah, these are themes that seem to transcend space and time, that somebody has taken a vocation onto themselves, and their care for their fellow man goes beyond this earthly shell of theirs. It continues long after death.
And I like how it's interactive.
It is.
Obviously, Gina saw somebody and was talking to somebody, and that somebody was talking back. And I'll bring this back up in a couple minutes with another topic we were talking about, but I find that interesting.
But what I find so interesting about these cases, and again, these are unique cases, is almost, not entirely 100% of the time, but most of the time, the people who are interacting with these spirits, the spirits know that this is not their particular time, that they know that there is a time delay, that they've crossed over, but they're still there just to make sure things are running smoothly. Gina, I don't know if you found that in this particular case or not, but the people that I've spoken to, they know that they have passed on, but they are there simply because this is part of who that they are. This is their life, and this is also their death as well, that they want to be there to continue on their vocation.
Yeah, no, I only experienced or encountered her one other time, but other people that had been at the hospital, some of the older people that were volunteers, said that's how they felt, that she was there to make sure everything was still going. And I did not feel in any way, shape, or form, this being was very happy about what they were doing. It was very, just being in her element is what I felt like. This person really enjoys what they're doing.
Sure. And the other thing about this is not only the caregiver, but in many instances, the people that were the patients there also reside after their death as well, because they felt not only at home, but they felt as if they were being cared for. And care continues even after they pass.
And I think that a lot of people probably would be surprised to find out, and Ron, you probably may know more about this if you've interviewed people at hospitals, but people at hospitals are very, not superstitious, but very respectful of that other plane of existence, wherever you may be going, whether you think you're going to heaven or you're moving on to another dimension. People are very mindful of that in the hospital. They do the things that are necessary to make sure that person's passing on not only what they need to do to the person physically, but to make sure that person's passing on into the next plane of existence, you know.
Yep, that's an excellent point. I've spoken with nurses before that it's hard to open up a window now in a hospital, open up doors, or they've covered up mirrors. And I've worked with people who were in hospice care, and oftentimes they will go into a place that it's the final hours of a person's life, and they will crack a window, because that is part of a lot of different cultures that have come to America. Or, like I said, the covering up of the window, opening up of the door, to allow the spirit, once it leaves the body, not to remain earthbound, but to find a release and get out of that place that was so familiar to them.
Yep, absolutely.
I think the word that you use there is a very good one. They're very respectful. These people are around life and death their entire job. You can imagine these people work over 40 hours a week. So imagine being in a place for 2 or 3 days at a time, and all that you are responsible for is making sure that a person either continues to be alive or they pass with some sort of dignity. That is an awesome obligation. And I've worked in these fields before, but I will tell you truthfully, I am in no way cut out for this kind of life. I will deal in it in counseling purposes or in just simple care, but there's no way that I could do the things that these people do on a day in, day out basis. There's no way.
And the other thing that comes along with it too is that the amount of energy that is involved in the person's life, trying to fight for that person's life, the person itself, the doctors, the nurses, the family members, and then inevitably if the person can't make it in this world and they have to pass on, there is so much bottled up energy in and around that area that I'm surprised things don't get more combustible when people pass on. You know?
That's right. Now, I've dealt with folks who were very aged. This wasn't like your typical 70, 80-year-old. I'm talking about people advanced in their 90s. And I remember working with one woman in particular. She was from Italy. She was an immigrant, and she had a very difficult life. She didn't learn to speak English until she was in grade school. The first time she ever ate sliced bread was actually in grade school as well, too. So she had a lot of disease that was with her since she's been younger. She had a very rare nerve condition. By the end of life, she was deaf and blind as well. And she knew that she was going to be passing. So what she did is anybody that had wronged her in life, she had brought them into her room and she sat there and she forgave them. Her husband wasn't always that kind to her. He cheated on her a lot. He really didn't have her as a priority. And she brought him into the room and she forgave him. It was on her terms. This is very powerful when these kind of things happen. And she refused food and she refused water. So she took death on her own terms. She wasn't going to be, she was the one that was responsible for everything that was going on. And those kind of things. So whenever we think about ghosts and we think about sadness that surrounds death, sometimes death can be met on with such courage and such conviction that there is a heroism to it. That it's a very heroic next step into whatever the universe has for you. And those kind of things, I don't think that when we talk about hauntings or people remaining on this plane, that's not for them. They've resolved everything that's happened here on this plane. So they are the ones that move on, or whatever kind of words we want to use for it. But it's for those people, I think, especially in traditional hauntings, that have unfinished business left to do. And that's the reason why they become earthbound. Or as we talked about before, that they still have a mission here on Earth to make sure other people are being cared for as well.
Absolutely. And then the other thing that I have personally seen in healthcare, and this is something that, again, I'm sure everybody, community, people are science, doctors, believers, non-believers are probably divided on, is when you approach that end of life. And I've seen this personally with patients and family members, where they start to see people. They start to think that they see people waiting for them who have already crossed over. They see their mother, or perhaps a child, or their dog from when they were a child is sitting at the end of the bed waiting for them. I've seen that so many times in my life. And again, that's scientifically speaking, it's the brain trying to prepare itself because you're going to pass away. Or is it grandma come back to make sure you get over to the other side? Is Fluffy suddenly there to play ball with you again? I've seen it time and time again working in the hospital.
Yeah, as have I. And I spoke to a psychologist about this before, and they have a great term. It's called wish fulfillment. This is what they want to imagine. But sometimes it's so visceral that how can this personal experience weigh so much on you as the observer? That's my thing. It's not personal anymore. It's actually affecting the energy in the room, and it becomes everybody's experience. It's just not that one person's experience. I've seen it happen as well too. I cannot shrug it off as simple wish fulfillment. There is something that goes on at the end of life in the majority of the cases that simply cannot be explained away through regular psychological terms. It just doesn't happen that way.
Why can't it be both? You know,
Well,
maybe your brain is preparing, but it's preparing to move to another phase and something we can't detect and know about yet. I'm just throwing that out. That's how that's how I think, my perspective, and it could be both of those.
But up until the age of the Enlightenment, it always was. And then we threw religion and we threw these kind of, superstitious, archaic belief systems out. And we said, that doesn't happen anymore. This is not how the human functions anymore. We are now mathematically programmed. We don't want to believe that there are things out there that we cannot understand, because part of who we are as human beings is believing that we have the capability of understanding everything. And whenever things don't make any sense, we don't like that. I do. We as a collective group doesn't like that. The idea that we are evolving in kind of the wrong direction has really it's been something that I've been looking at now for a while. Whenever I was a kid, everybody went to church, everybody knew their neighbors. And now the third fastest growing belief in the world is atheism, because we don't want to believe in this kind of stuff anymore, because there's responsibility that comes with it as well. But also the idea that this is all quite, quaint. It's what rustic people do. We don't need this kind of stuff anymore. And what I find out in a world that is moving more and more away from religions is that we still cannot explain these kind of near-death experiences, or these people that have come back, or the realm of ghosts and hauntings. It's all very difficult to explain away to people that automatically say that we have no soul and there's nothing else out there. There is this kind of, warfare that goes on, and it's not readily explainable to people. Go ahead, Colin.
Okay. But the atheist, the person who says, I don't believe you when you make the claim of ghosts or you make the claim of religion, is not the one that has to explain it away. The burden of proof is on the person making the claim, the person saying these things. Right. So what I am saying here is the position of proof is on you guys, right. Not on me as an atheist.
Right. But see, the thing is, though, we're not looking for anybody to prove what we know instinctually, what we experienced. It's the atheists, and I'm not saying you, or it's the people that are relying on science that will attack us for having these kind of experiences and talking about these kind of experiences. That's the problem. Gina's had enough experiences. I've had enough experiences to say, I don't need anybody to validate this for me. I'm fine with it. But there are people out there that are looking for answers, and they turn to people and they say, well, we know this, Gina. We talked about this on a show earlier. You're not supposed to see these things. You're not supposed to hear these things. So grow up or shake out of it, that kind of a thing. And that's what people are being told nowadays. There's not any kind of comfort there anymore. It's a very cold, hard world, I think. And I don't like the way we're trending as the human race.
And unfortunately, I don't think anything. I don't think there's a single conference, convention we can go to, a single person that's written a book we could talk to, a single other supernatural paranormal podcast or show we can watch that proves anything.
Exactly.
That's the thing. Exactly. But people still have some belief in it. And there is, for me, there's still something to have belief. There needs to be more wonderment with the world again. And I know I know the argument, if you don't believe in magic, then you won't see magic. And I know the counter argument is, if you believe in magic, then all you ever go do is see magic when it doesn't really exist. I understand that. But I will hold this line that I think some of these things can be proven, just not with our current state of science or our current state of technology or our current state of where we exist in the cosmos, or however you want to do it. But at some point, I believe that it will be proven in some way. Maybe not the way we're thinking now, and maybe something completely different that we can't even imagine right now. But I think these things will at some point be proven.
I like that point. And then if we are able to prove these things in a very scientific way, that kind of then shatters a lot of who we are, doesn't it? If we can prove that there is something out there past life, or there's something out there, or it's hard for me to conceptualize, even though I'm a religious person and I'm a person that's very open to these kind of things, look at the world with that wonderment that you talked about. But if science then starts saying that, yeah, what you're talking about does have a basis in reality, that kind of shatters things, I think, for me a little bit, because it's one of those things that's so personal to me then I really don't want anybody to validate.
And that's one of the things. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, and just to jump in on a couple of things there, for me personally, and I've been on the receiving end of this. In being an atheist is not a problem to me. I wholeheartedly think that's, I myself at times question
Whether
God,
Chucky
a God,
really
that
exists.
God. I do, because of the things that's happened in my life. But at the same time, I'm like one of those, like, my biggest problem with anything for anybody is I have my beliefs, you have your beliefs. We can both agree that we each have our beliefs, and that should be enough. Ron, you touched on it. I don't need anybody to tell me, or I don't need proof. I don't need that, like, validation anymore that this is real, or this has happened to me, or I believe in ghosts or interdimensional beings or quantum physics and travel, because I know what I know to be true. Instinctually I feel it and I know it, and I don't need anybody to prove anything to me in the entire universe of the world. I'm looking for it because my hope is that me doing this or talking to anybody else in the world is to let other people know you aren't alone in the way that you feel. You're not going crazy. You may have actually seen what you've seen. And then if you didn't see it, then let's help you figure it out. I really want to help other people understand that what they're going through does not necessarily, mean that they're going crazy or they're faking it, that what they've seen could possibly have actually happened.
And see, that's another good point too. If we would have had this radio show a couple hundred years ago, which wouldn't have been a radio show, but if we were standing out in the public square talking about this stuff, we could have been killed for this. So that's we've come a long way, right?
I can run faster than you guys, so.
Oh my God.
And just as a reminder to us four, but also to people listening, that was one of our goals with doing this. We weren't setting out to pound our beliefs into people.
Oh,
and
no,
say,
no.
This is what you should believe. And we weren't setting out to say, we're going to prove any of it exists. We're going to prove ghosts. We're going to prove. That wasn't our goal. Our goal was to explore every one of these topics and things from 4 different viewpoints, and without necessarily judging each of the different viewpoints, having those. We could discuss it. We could say, here's why I don't believe that and why you believe this or whatever. And for me, I love hearing both sides to just about everything. I change my mind at times because I hear a good argument that I'm like, oh, I can see that. There's a lot of times I'll even devil's advocate myself. I'll say, but and I'll go both sides. But let me just say, I think we should dictate now for all future references, we don't use God, we use Chuck. We need to say Chuck.
What happens if it's a woman?
Chuckette?
Oh, Mara.
Mara, yeah. Okay, so the other night, Gina and I were talking about something. Go ahead.
I had one last thing I wanted to say. My goal with the show may not be necessarily to figure this stuff out, but my goal being involved with the unexplained is to find solutions. And 99 times out of 100, the solution is either going to be something known to science or I don't know, because I'm not a scientist myself. Where I draw the line with belief is Matt Dillahunty says this all the time, and I like it. I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. And specifically where it comes to what is demonstrably true. So that's really where I draw the line. I have not found any demonstrable evidence for God or ghosts or anything to make me buy into it at all, and that's where I am.
And that's fine. And that's why we keep you around. Besides having glorious hair, it's because to keep us honest, so we don't go too far off the rails that, well, we believe it, so it must be true. But we still have our beliefs based on our own, what's happened to us. I will 100% tell you there is something because of several experiences I've had in my life. And Gina's the same way. She's experienced things. So there is something. Can we say what it is? No, but we can say what we think it is based on our beliefs and what we've experienced. And I don't begrudge you at all, Colin. I like hearing the art. So Gina, and in fact, Colin, this next part is like the exact opposite of everything we've been talking about for the past 45 minutes. And Gina and I were discussing this the other night in regards to experiencing things. So Gina, you want to bring up the topic of what we were talking about with the medicine.
Right. So I am governed by my emotions, and I often wish I could go back to my 19-year-old self and say, hey, look, you don't have to be such a spazoid. You don't have to let your emotions rule everything that you do. But it defined who I am. That's who I am. But as I got older, I started to realize that I was not reining in my special kind of crazy, let's say, and I was taking on too much on my shoulders of everybody else's burdens. And I finally realized that I needed some help. And my provider so graciously decided to start me on a medication called Cymbalta. My anxiety was at like DEFCON 4, and I was covered in hives all the time. I was constantly like prickly and itchy. And she said, this is what you need. Your anxiety is too much. What I discovered, and when I started to take the Cymbalta, which has been fairly recently, is that I noticed, for me, it drowned out, I think, what has made me who I am. I think what I told Stephen the other night was this, simply saying, since I started taking Cymbalta, a lot of the paranormal things, as you would, or magical, or whatever word you want to use, doesn't seem to happen to me as much. I feel like I have to concentrate a little bit harder to hear them. Whereas before, they were flooding me incredibly bad. So what does that mean? What does that say? Is the medication blocking that part of my brain that opened that world to me, that paranormal world, that magical world, whatever you want to call it? Or was this medication now blocking the part of my brain that just thinks that way? Does that make sense in what I'm saying? Is it the medication that's cut off paranormal, or is it the medication that shut off what I thought or what I think is paranormal? Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a great point. Again, that goes back to the whole Stephen Collins argument as well. And see, again, playing devil's advocate. So we could say that the human being is the one that projects the paranormal out into the world, that everything is normal. We just perceive it as being extraordinary or supernatural. That's us doing that. And that the medication blocked off that impulse to look at it that way. Or on the same line, do you have to be open to these things in order to recognize them as being paranormal? And the medication shuts that part out because it won't allow you to look at it from that perspective.
Example A assumes that the paranormal exists, which is, as much as you guys buy, I don't want to say buy into it, but believe, has not been demonstrably proven. Option B pretty much falls along known science. So option B has a lower burden of proof than option A, to the point where, because we know things like that happen with medication, where your brain chemistry changes and you experience things differently than you did previously, I would argue that is the most likely explanation.
And we even said that when her and I were talking the other night. But go ahead, sweetie.
The other thing that I want to throw in there too, go into some of our weekends that we have in the past. I got to meet a gentleman. His first name is Bill. Him and I made a really big connection a couple years back. And at that particular point in time, I was not on Cymbalta or any other medication to help with anxiety. But he taught me, basically, in his terms, was to how to shield myself, because I wear my heart on my sleeve, so to speak, and my emotions, again, are out there. That's what I'm in tune with the most, was basically literally to learn how to raise my shields in defense of myself against other people, to like physically actually picture shields going up around me to keep that at bay, to keep that out. That's something else that he taught me in the couple weekends that we spent together in Pittsburgh or wherever that other one was. And that's something that I still actually practice to this day too, is to literally, again, picture a bubble around me, a shield, because I don't want not only that paranormal, that magical, that whatever in everyday life, people at work, stuff that happens at home. I have to shield it sometimes and protect myself against it, because otherwise I think I would explode. So that's also goes along with that too, in that same sense.
And as a quick aside with that, we should try and talk to him about being a guest and talk about Reiki. He does Reiki, and that would probably be an interesting topic that I don't think many people have explored. But yeah, that's basically what she and I talked about and said. I said right away exactly what Colin said. You've got paranormal exists and it's blocking you being able to see it because you had a part of you that was tuned into it, or B, it doesn't exist and it's always been hallucinations or only in your mind, which honestly to me,
B doesn't even assume that it doesn't exist. All it argues is that what is causing what Gina is experiencing is not paranormal. So you can believe in the paranormal and go with B as the option anyway. They're not mutually exclusive.
But what I was going to say about seeing things, we know that our brains are what see things, and our brains filter things. And Colin has said before, if like for me, I love BMW and I had a BMW. So I see a whole lot of BMWs on the road. But people I may drive the same route, in the same car with me, we may get done with the trip and they'll say, I didn't see a single BMW. There must not be as many around. So you're focusing on things based on what you want. But also, if you ask any cop about any crime scene and they interview 5 people and they'll say all 5 of them told me the truth, and I got 5 different stories, because we do remember things differently. So still, maybe it isn't paranormal stuff, but it's, to me, what is it then? What is Gina experiencing, and how does this medicine affect it? I would be just as interested in finding out how the medicine has changed things. If we could get her blood chemistry from 5 years ago, if we could get her blood chemistry from when she was 20, and we could get, I don't know, some of those Venkman tests that he did in Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
You know, what I'm saying, to me, whether it's paranormal, not paranormal, saying she saw paranormal or not saw paranormal or just saw hallucination, to me, I would be just as interested to find out how the medicine did affect what she was experiencing, seeing, and in whatever capacity.
And how that part interprets the world around you. And this is all worthy of study, sure.
Yeah, it's again, that could be the argument. Maybe paranormal doesn't exist, but it may be just our interpretation of what's around us. And we've seen some videos, we've heard stories of little kids that see things that others don't. So everyone dismisses it as, well, they're a little kid, they have an imaginary friend. What if that imaginary friend is a real friend that we can't see? So that's a question that keeps it interesting, if nothing else.
Right. Yeah, the human mind is one of these great places that I really would like to explore more and more. You could also argue that there's something in the child's mind that is not fully developed, and then whenever it becomes fully developed, it cuts off that access to that world as well. It's fascinating.
Or is it society that trains them to see differently?
It's indoctrinated to become atrophied.
Yes, that's an argument that, maybe could be, which again, I think this would be a dangerous experiment, mostly for me, but it'd be interesting if Gina quit taking the Cymbalta for about 6 months and see what would happen. But I'd probably need to live with you for a while, Ron.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Well, I will tell you what, before we get off here, I was teaching a class of 20 kids, and we were listening to music. We were talking about the outside. We were talking about just nature, okay, about being in nature. The class assignment was we were going to go out and be in nature. We were going to sit there and just listen to the world around us, okay? So we took their crayons and we took their paper with them. We went out and we just sat there and listened. And the assignment was to draw a picture of what, out of 20 children, 18 children drew a figure with a large head, these kind of blue shape, these blue round eyes and everything like that. And as I trace it and I look at it, I can find comparative images in other cultures throughout the world. So again, you have to ask yourself, is this part of the human understanding, the human mind? Are we creating this? Or is there indeed something out there that we used to be able to perceive but now we stopped allowing us to see that kind of thing.
That's interesting. Did they explain what they were drawing, what they saw?
Well, I'll tell you what. So these children between the ages of 4 and 6. So these were young little kids. And basically what they were doing is they were personifying what they had seen. They were like making nature into this kind of figure. And that might be something that's very natural for kids to do. But what I found so utterly unique is they were drawing the same. Now, of course, kids this age are not going to have their repertoire of drawing all these kind of.
They draw like me.
Exactly. That's right. That's right. But it was odd to think that 18 out of 20 kids drew a similar figure without them looking off of each other's paper or anything like that.
Ron,
That's what they saw the natural world to be.
what color are your eyes?
My eyes are hazel.
Okay.
No, I can see what your point is as well too. Yeah, but yeah, well, I will tell you though, one of these children that drew this, we also read the book entitled "What Snowmen Do at Night." I don't know if any of you had the pleasure of reading this, but it's basically these kids draw a snow, or they build a snowman and they make up what happens at night. So the book covers that they're going roller skating or ice skating or what have you. So part of the assignment was we read this book and we said, okay, now I want you to draw pictures of what your snowman does at night. And this little kid brought up his paper, and I said, so what is your snowman doing? And he said, he's driving around in a van looking for children. So
He's got candy eyes he's giving out.
exactly. So kids can be very imaginative as well too. But I just thought that was a unique thing, and I was very happy that these parents allowed me to experiment on their children for a day in the spring. So that's right. That's right.
That's another topic we should talk about.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
All right. Hey, before we go, because this was a great talk, you probably still have some more stories to tell at some time, huh, sweetie?
I do.
Okay. So before we go, we have an interesting set of coincidences that happened to us yesterday. And I know these things happen mathematically, they're going to happen, but this one just really stood out to us yesterday. So yesterday morning, we watched Loki, the second episode.
Okay.
And one of the songs in it was Holding Out for a Hero. Remember that from the 80s? It was from Footloose. And then Gina and I went to her father's, and he was watching a British TV show called Strike Back, MI6 agents and stuff. And the episode we watched had Holding Out for a Hero in it as one of the songs. Then for her birthday, I took her out to see The Hitman's Wife Bodyguard, and guess what song was in that movie?
No.
And I looked at her, I said, are you kidding me? Then we come home and Colin's all excited and shows us the trailer for the He-Man cartoon coming out. And you know what that song is? Holding Out for a Hero. I'm like, 4 times in one day we heard that song. Now I know Colin always says because you're paying attention to it, but this like just jumped out.
Yeah. And it's an old song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Gina, you actually got to spend the end of your day with your hero. How about that? Steven.
Who are you with? I thought you were with me. I fell asleep early. What's going on? All right.
You know what? They might have been playing it because her birthday, Bonnie Tyler's birthday, was in the last week. So at least on the radio, they might have been playing it a bit more often.
We didn't hear it on the radio.
Yeah, we never heard it on the radio.
Oh, I thought you said on the radio.
No, and I even had the 80s station on. Me.
Speaking of Bonnie
I don't know.
Tyler,
I was just thinking of something.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, though, Total Eclipse of the Heart. We remember that song. Remember?
Yeah.
You know that was supposed to be a song in a play about vampires that never came to pass.
Really?
Yeah. So I can wait whenever we talk about the paranormal in arts and literature.
Yeah.
I can wait for this to be good.
Yeah, that's going to be an upcoming episode. Colin's got a lot of good comic book stuff. And I actually was thinking of doing a talk about the supernatural and paranormal in literature through the ages.
Yes.
I think that'd be an interesting, fun
talk.
talk.
Oh, it would. It would.
All right, folks. I think we're good.
Awesome, guys.
We are.
Talk to you later.
I'm holding on to a hero. Holding on for a hero.
Right.
I need a hero.
I need a hat. I need a good hat to be a good hero.
Ron, I don't know if you saw, but I said you should have told the IRS you work for the
I did see
MIB.
that. I did see that. I should have told them that. Yeah. I can't disclose any of my financial information because I work with the men.